Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for listening in. I'm really pleased to say that I'm joined by David Martin, who is a corporate partner at Linklaters and also responsible for diversity at the firm. David, really lovely to have you join me. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. We've obviously known each other for quite some time, so delighted to join you for this chat.
It does feel like a bit of a reunion, doesn't it? Because you joined Linklaters, I think, a couple of years after me. So in 2009 as a trainee?
No, you're making me younger than I am. No, I started, so I first day 2000, qualified 2002, and we'd have been in corporate together early 2000, I think, wouldn't we?
We would indeed, because I qualified into the corporate team in 1999.
There you go.
Yeah, so I am sadly a little bit older than you.
Oh,
And
you
how did you end up at Linklaters? What sort of influenced your decision to train as a lawyer in the city?
So in terms of my own story, I grew up in West Wales, a rural community down there, and just went to a normal comp state school, which doesn't exist anymore. It got merged into a sort of a super school. And it felt like I did quite well at school. And I think I was in a community where if you did well at school, you became a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. And I quite like problem solving. I quite like people. I like the prospect of travel. So that kind of ended up at law, I guess. So I was encouraged to go to university, went to Nottingham, studied in Nottingham, had a great time there. And then as part of the sort of the milk round with the big law firms from London that come and visit the universities, I attended the Linklaters presentation, was impressed. And was able to secure a training contract. I didn't get an internship. I didn't get a VAC scheme. I was unsuccessful in that, and that's a whole other story. But got a training contract. So that was sort of my path, really. It was, but I didn't know very much about law in the city at the time. It's sort of, and certainly when I arrived, it wasn't maybe what I was expecting. But
What were you expecting? What was your view on working as a city lawyer compared to what it was like in reality? Because there does seem to be a bit of a mismatch between what students perceive to be, the role of a corporate lawyer or a city lawyer versus the reality. For me, for example, I didn't fully appreciate how much paper is involved.
A lot paper. Less paper now. We're much more environmentally friendly now than we were 20 years ago. But yes, I think that one of the things I always say to students is I think it's quite important to get some work experience, right? If you can get work experience, whether it be at school or whilst at university, that's a really good thing. So at school, I did some work experience at a local high street firm. I did one of the CPS, and I kind of worked out that wasn't what I wanted to do. And then when I was at Nottingham, I did a few sort of summer placements. I applied for many, but I did a few summer placements in London, which sort of gave me a bit of an insight into what commercial law, city law was all about. And now, we at Links, we've been doing the sort of the virtual internship, which has been particularly important during lockdown. And actually that's really helped. I think that those work placements give students a bit of an insight into what it's like to be a lawyer, whether that
Agreed.
be, and you can sort of, and it's some negative learning as well, right? You can actually, I don't want to be a criminal lawyer. I don't want to be a city lawyer. And that helped too, but it gave me an insight on what it was all about. So, but I think probably it was, you do have perceptions, right? I mean, and I think we're probably much more diverse now than we were 20 years ago. But what I did find is there are lots of different people from different backgrounds. It was a lot less serious than I was expecting it to be. And we had a lot of fun, as you know. We had a lot of fun as young lawyers finding our way in London. And I enjoyed that, the sort of the social side of it, and just meeting sort of the variety and the diversity. For someone that had come from a small community in Wales and wanted to see a bit of the world, that was super exciting. So I found, I don't think the work was at all what I was expecting, but in terms of the sort of the cultural side, I was pleasantly surprised.
How do you think, what advice would you give to students or even someone who's making a lateral move on how you can determine the culture? Because you don't always have the luxury to meet people. Because I guess from my experience, I wish I was a bit more discerning when I was researching law firms, because I went for the really sort of trivial things like, I wanted to join Clifford Chance because they had a swimming pool in their building. And I was very wowed by how impressive a building was rather than how impressive a firm's client base is, for example. And I think that it's a question that gets asked so often. How do you determine culture if you don't get the chance to meet people? What sort of clues should you be looking for?
Look, I think that that's the hard bit, right? I think you've got to remember that all the recruitment teams in the city, there's a sales element, isn't there? There's sort of those,
There is, yeah.
the cartoons that sort of show the recruitment experience versus the day one experience. I think that it's very difficult to distinguish between city law firms, in terms of, we get questions around the training, international travel opportunities, inevitably salaries. Now, what tech have you got? Which phone am I going to get? But actually, the culture, right? And I think we're getting more on campus. We get more questions around diversity, more questions around values.
Yeah.
You can see some of that. You can see some of the diversity. There's obviously lots of different forms of diversity. You can see some of it. I think you just have to. I think it's very, very hard to differentiate between those big firms. And that's why I said, if you're fortunate enough to have sort of that work experience, that internship, that gives you for 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, a really invaluable insight into what it is like to be in that institution. But for me, I think one of the telltale signs, and I feel this a bit when I sort of now, and this is probably true more for laterals, is that when you interact with people from other firms, do they enjoy each other's company?
Yeah.
Do people like being together? Do they, when you talk to them, do they display your values? And not to make too quick a judgment. I do know that sort of people will, they look at me, right? I'm a white bloke and a city partner. People will make assumptions about who I am and what my background is until they start to talk to me and they hear a bit of my own story.
Yeah.
And there's so many times I've sort of talked on panels and people have come up to me after and said, "Oh, thank you for sharing that, because you're right. I did have an assumption about who you were and what you're all about when I first saw you." And it's trying to get beyond that and trying to get to know the firm and the people. But for me, one key thing is, do people enjoy each other's company? And do they display, and do they live our value? Do they live my values?
Yeah, agreed. Because ultimately, practicing law is practicing law. And I think it's the people that really make a business and create the culture that prevails.
Correct.
We'll come on to diversity a bit later, because it is also, a very important sort of subject for Cheeky Little Careers. Let's talk a little bit more about your career at Linklaters. How has your journey been? Because you've obviously stayed with the same firm since arriving as a trainee and progressed. No, I'm sure there's more to it.
Yeah, I'm a lifer. So I think sort of one of the highlights for me was, as we were chatting before, so Sally, my wife, we started work on day one. So that was a clear highlight, right? So thank you to Linklaters for matchmaking. There are many.
Did Linklaters give you a present? I remember that if you meet your partner or wife or spouse at Linklaters, they give you, I think, some vouchers for John Lewis.
Yeah, you do get well, you did. I don't know if you still do, but I think you get a marriage gift. I don't think it's vouchers. It may be in the form of hard cash. Now,
even better.
It was great. So that was very kind, which I'm very grateful. And I did get a wedding speech from Mr. Chain, who was then our team leader. So that's
David Chain, for those of you who aren't familiar. Yeah.
The listeners that know who David was, his speeches were always quite special. So Sally was a highlight. So we were together. So started life as a corporate associate in a team with you, working with sort of the blue chip corporate clients, the listed clients that Linklaters is very well known for, and that included a secondment to Vodafone M&A team, which was then based down in Newbury, which was a fantastic experience to do a client secondment and actually see the world through the client lens. I think that was a really valuable experience. And also, I should say, as a trainee, was fortunate enough to spend 6 months as part of our rotation over in Hong Kong, because one of the reasons I joined the firm was I wanted to travel and see the world. And actually, so spending 6 months in Hong Kong was brilliant. I think because of the client secondment and life developments, I didn't do an overseas secondment as an associate, which actually I think with hindsight, I wish I'd done. I wish I'd maybe spent a couple of years overseas. Sally and I would have done that, would have been brilliant. And then as I progressed to the corporate team, I was asked, would I go overseas to the Middle East? I've been doing quite a bit of work for some Middle Eastern clients. Would I go to the Middle East and help open an office in Abu Dhabi, which was 2011, which is when I was just made up as partner in 2012. And actually, for me, in terms of what were the highlights of my career looking back, actually that was a brilliant one. One of the partners, Jeremy Parr, who was one of my mentors, Jeremy said to me, it's a great opportunity And you can look back at your career in years to come and say, well, didn't I have a wonderful time living in South London for 20, 30 years? Or you could say, well, actually, but in the middle of it, I spent 5 years in a different country doing something completely different. And it's not often you get, we're 170, 80 years old. We don't actually open that many new offices. So actually to get the chance to build something from scratch and to be fully involved in everything from the licensing and where's the photocopier going to go, and who are going to be our people and who's going to join the team and whatever, and how are we going to go and get our brand, build our brand. For me, that was a phenomenal experience, both as an individual and as a lawyer, and sort of I think as a young partner doing that and forcing you out of your comfort zone, going from an environment where you had the Linklaters brand in London and you had a phenomenal blue chip client base around you with the partners you were working with, to sort of in effect not, and having to start from scratch. And I learned a lot. So that was brilliant. And I was there for 6.5 years. We went out with 2 children. We came back with 3. My youngest was born in a hurricane. She was storm-born, so we call her Daenerys when she's naughty. And I came back in 2017. And so since I've come back, I'm in the sponsored team in London, working with a great group of people, and been back 3 years, and now, as you mentioned at the start, as our sort of also the global diversity partner.
And at what point did you think, I want to do this forever, or had you always come to Linklaters with a vision that you'd one day become a partner? Because I guess the reason I asked that question is that, as far as I'm concerned, when I speak to lawyers as a career coach, a lot of them lack that long-term vision, and they take quite a short-termist view. And I think with law especially, it's quite important to obviously have that sort of short-term goal, but also to have that eye on the sort of longer-term goal as well.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways I could answer that, I guess. I think some of the best advice I got as a young lawyer was that sort of legal careers 20 years ago were sort of in sort of almost 2-year increments. So you sort of had law school be 1-2 years. If you hadn't a law degree, training contract was 2 years. 2 years as a junior associate, then it's 2 years to senior associate, 2 years, and then hopefully partnership. And it doesn't unfortunately happen quite that quickly anymore, but so those 2 years. And so it was always a case of, when it came to qualification, don't just look at the job you're going to be doing on qualification. What's the job that someone that is 2 years qualified doing? And how do you feel about doing that role? As a corporate associate, you're going to be doing some due diligence, but actually what's a 2-year associate doing? What's a 4-year associate doing? So there was sort of just having a bit of structure. I do think and it's a little bit of a taboo subject, but I do think that being a firm that demands so much of you, your decision to be there needs to be positive. And actually that does mean constantly assessing and reflecting on your own career. Am I making the right choices? And not sort of realizing too late that actually maybe you were best destined for something else, right? Not many people ultimately make it to partnership in big law, but that doesn't mean that you can't have an amazing career doing something else, whether it be in private practice or in-house or doing something completely different.
Like me,
exactly right. So I think, so there's a bit of that, I think, just challenging oneself, being honest with oneself, working out, why am I doing this, right? Why am I continuing to do this? Am I enjoying it? Do I enjoy going to work? Someone said to me, if you've got a job where a third of the year you're happy, a third of the year you're unhappy, and a third of the year you're indifferent, actually that maybe isn't a bad career. But I think having those honest conversations. I think also I don't have any issue with people being ambitious. I think actually being able to articulate and say, I'd like to be a partner, please can you help me progress? That's a good conversation to have. That's owning your career. And I think we're open to that, because as a partner, I'm open to someone saying that to me. I want someone to progress their career collaboratively, collegiately. I'm not one to sort of, I'm not a fan of maybe the sharp elbows, but actually I think if you come through collaborative, ultimately these are partnerships, right? When you're a partner, it's a partnership model. We're collegiate. We work together. That culture is really important. I want people coming through that are collaborative. But I think ambition is good.
I agree with you. I think that being proactive and having that degree of ambition and really taking reasonable measures to, articulate to partners that this is, these are where the gaps are in your skill set, or this is what I want to be doing a bit more of, is really important, because you need to take some ownership of that. You can't just leave career progression to chance.
And I think that, and then the flip of that, right, is it's incumbent on us as owners of the business to create an environment where people can have those conversations.
Agreed.
because actually you will find people that will leave because actually they haven't fulfilled what they wanted, and that might be because they've never had that conversation, or they're misreading a situation. So for me, we've introduced sort of a mentoring program now for our first seat trainees. So actually right from the start of someone's career, walk in the door at Silk Street, they've got mentors. So I mentor two young trainees who I've been mentoring now for nearly their entire training contract. And that is all about helping them build their network and have a conversation, having a relationship with someone senior that can be a mentor. And if it works, that's great. But actually building that environment where people can have in their appraisal, which shouldn't just be an annual event. I'd like that much more frequently to happen. Have those conversations. And actually, I'd like to work with this client, or I'd really love to spend some time in this country. How would I go about that? And actually, for the partners to create a culture where you can have it and you can help guide people's careers. Because for me, that's quite fulfilling, right?
Look, as somewhat talking of sort of mentoring and junior colleagues, etc. I remember being at Linklaters during the .com crash and the sort of recession that followed, and it left me feeling quite unsettled. And I'm sure there are lots of lawyers, hopefully listening to this, who are concerned about what the pandemic means for sort of careers in the city. And the same applies for students who are going to be applying, hopefully, for vacation schemes over the sort of autumn months. What advice can you give them in terms of prospects for the city in this climate and lessons learned during previous downturns? Because we've both also obviously lived through the financial crisis as well.
Yeah, so if I look at it from a firm perspective, there's a lot of change going on in the world at the moment. We've got Brexit, we've got the pandemic.
Yeah, of course.
We've got trade wars, you've got protectionism. All of those things create opportunities, right? They create opportunities for clients, and therefore they create opportunities for us, right? Because lawyers are needed when there's uncertainty and volatility and opportunity. We are, as an institution, we are, I think, one of the largest recruiters of legal talent in the city, and I can't see that changing. I think we take a medium to long-term view of our business, and we're very, very heavily invested in recruitment. The big challenge for us at the moment is getting the best people through the door, that race for talent that we want, and that will continue. So we saw in our own business, obviously there was the shock of lockdown, but actually busyness levels are getting back to pre-lockdown levels. And we've got, as you know, we've got our rotation and qualification in this month, and we're taking four newly qualified back into our team, which, for our size, that's a big number, but that is indicative of the fact that we're taking a medium to long view, and we have a pipeline and people move through the bands, and we've got to keep investing in our people. So for me, it feels slightly strange to say this, but it's almost as if it's all business as usual. There clearly are going to be implications of the lockdown, and people will sort of pause to reflect on the numbers they're recruiting. But for us, I'd like to think, and my expectation, it will just continue.
Yeah, and certainly talking to sort of other partners I am in contact with regularly, there is more optimism about sort of opportunities for law firms in this climate than there was during the financial crisis, for example, which was, it was almost literally four horsemen of the apocalypse. It felt very frightening. I think it was different. It was a different type of crisis.
It was, and it is. We know we because at the time we had a large number of clients in or invested in the financial services sector. Actually, there was a need for lawyers doing what we did, with combining sort of the restructuring teams and the regulatory teams and disputes teams. So that meant that we were very busy, and you talk to sort of some of the other firms, and I know that they will say that actually that period of time, that volatility was some of the busiest times they've ever seen. So there will be challenges. I think because of the change, you need to be on the front foot and think, well, what does this mean for our business? And sort of think, actually, some things might need to change. Yeah.
And you mentioned lockdown, so I've got to ask you, how have you found lockdown? And I know that Linklaters has been quite sort of a bit of a trailblazer in terms of return to work policies, etc.
Yeah, so I think that for me, when I came back from the Middle East, I moved out of London. I used to live in South London. I moved out, sort of out into London to be nearer to the in-laws and my mum. So actually I've got some outside space, and I totally get that, you know, some people and many people in our teams live in central London. It's a different experience. But for me, having a bit of outside space, I've got into gardening, which I never thought I would. But actually, I think that there's that switching off, right? That ability to switch off, and the difference between work and home, and that line. I think a lot of people have struggled with that. And I was talking to a friend last night, and sort of he'd imposed a mini commute where his wife would make him walk around the garden to simulate, or go for a walk down the street to simulate his commute. For me, it was a bit of gardening, actually, just being able to do that and just switch off. There aren't many things that I can totally switch off. That was one of them. So I've enjoyed getting into gardening, and I've enjoyed doing a bit of exercise. It's something I always get told in my medicals I need to do more of. So I've done a bit of exercise as well. And actually, by not doing the commute, it's meant I've just got to spend more time with the family, and that's been great. It's been being on Teams, Zoom, WebEx calls all day. It's tiring. It's quite hard work. And particularly if you're presenting to large numbers of people on a blank screen, you don't get much back.
Agreed. It feels very weird, doesn't it?
Really
presenting to a blank screen. Yeah, agreed.
Really quite, you've got no visual cues, and it means there's a disproportionate amount when someone writes to you separately and go, "Thanks so much, I really enjoyed that," or "That was really interesting," or "I learned a lot." It's like, okay, great, because otherwise you wouldn't know, because you can't really see anybody. So I've been. There have been some positives. I've tried to take some real positives from the lockdown experience, but I was in the office this week. I went in for the day, so we've sort of got, you know, following government guidelines, all the stickers on the floor, hand sanitized stations, social distancing, all of that sort of stuff is, as you would expect, very well done by our ops team, for which thank you. And it was nice, right? It's so nice to go in and see people face to face. The world has clearly changed, and we were already doing agile working, where people would work from home and stuff before the lockdown. But actually now it's good to see people, and I've enjoyed that. And I am very aware that, you know, the office culture is part of the firm. I don't see that changing, to be honest. But
absolutely, I think, you know, people, you know, one of the reasons that I was attracted to train at Linklaters was because there were lots of trainees, and my entire social life centered around hanging out with my fellow trainees. And I think that's where, you know, this generation has really had it tough.
I agree, absolutely. It's that as a trainee sharing an office with your principal, it's
absolutely
the sitting in and listening on a call and learning and watching how partners and senior associates conduct themselves with clients, and you learn so much from that. And I don't think whereas now the conversations might be more limited, you haven't got that physical interaction. So I think there's definitely, and particularly as sort of as I said earlier on, training was so important. Actually, it's not just the formal training, the presentations, is actually the sort of the informal learnings, the developing your own styles, all those things I think are learned from physical interaction.
Absolutely. I mean, I certainly learnt so much by sharing offices with some really, really sort of impressive sort of senior colleagues. Even as you say, listening in to their calls, and there would be buzzwords that I'd think, oh, do you know what, I might use that next time. That sounds far more polished than the way I would have presented it. So that is a shame, and hopefully, you know, there'll be some normality. But your firm, as I said earlier, has adopted quite a radical approach, that you've decided that you can let people work from home more sort of frequently than previously. What's that all about?
Yeah, so the new sort of policy, agile working policy, it's a global policy, and it's something, as the diversity partner, I sit on our people committee, and so this is something we've been talking about for a long time. So pre-COVID, this is sort of an ongoing discussion. I think we recognise that the world is changing. Technology is better, as we can see. People want to take more ownership of their careers. We think that actually agile working, and there's lots of research to support this, agile working will mean that we can recruit and retain and progress more diverse talent. It is going to benefit, you know, people with families. There's gender dynamics around it as well. So there's lots of good reason to have an agile working policy. And I think we put it out there because we just want to recognise that people can have that flexibility. There's obviously responsibility that goes with it, and we have to remember that we're a client-facing business, and it has to work for the client. It has to work for the team you're working in. You know, going back to that training, the training point. Actually, there are times where I should be the leader in the office and with the team, and recognise I have responsibility to develop my young people. So there's clearly a conversation, and it's going to be fluid, and everyone will approach it quite differently. But fundamentally, I think we recognise that if we can deliver the best work for the best clients by being agile in how we work, then that's a good thing, and that's sort of a policy that's suited for the future.
So what else is in your inbox then as diversity partner?
That's a good question. So we've got multiple strands to our diversity strategy, and I sort of have global responsibility. We've got Diversity Week at the firm coming up next week, which is great, and we're focusing on psychological safety and sort of psychological safety in people's careers and building trust. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
We've just launched Diversibility, as we're calling it, so our disability strand to diversity. So Diversibility is now a priority strand, which we launched earlier in the year, and I'm doing some really interesting things around that. We're working with an organisation who've emailed me this week actually around sort of working with them to help progress diverse talent in the workplace, and it's something we're thinking about. There's obviously race strategy in light of the events this year with Black Lives Matter. So there's work to do around that for the autumn, and we continue with sort of a lot of our long-running programs around things like gender. So our Women's Leadership Program, which is taking our talented senior female talent and helping them with their career progression, and increasingly we find this with all of our diversity strands, is pulling that further and further forward. So I've mentioned already the mentoring program that we've got for our first seat trainees, but actually for our gender talent, we've got we're doing a stepping forward program, which is for younger female associates, of the mid-level associates, rather than just waiting until people are too senior, having the career conversations and the development plans earlier. And probably the last one I'd mention, which is sort of an interesting one. So in a couple of weeks, so during lockdown, our training team did a really interesting program, lockdown learning for our female talent, and around how different genders approach negotiations.
Okay.
And this, I wasn't participating in the program, right? It was for our female colleagues, and I was getting pinged by all these messages from some of the attendees going, "This is absolutely fantastic. This is really good. You need to understand and hear all about this." And so on the back of the recommendation of my female colleagues, I'm now running a session in a couple of weeks for our male colleagues. So I'm hosting it with one of our very talented know-how team member colleagues to talk about gender dynamics in negotiations for an all-male audience. So I don't think we've ever done that before. It's a first, but it was instigated by my female colleagues. So we can see how that goes. That's quite exciting. I'm a little bit nervous. I do get a little bit nervous putting myself out there and talk about diversity issues. You wouldn't maybe think that from the way I'm talking now, but I do. And I'm looking forward to that. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. And there's obviously some science.
Yeah.
And then we're obviously going to try and bring it to life with some stories and some experiences that we've all seen in our working careers.
No, it's nice to see that you've got such a busy schedule, and I can see that there is genuine passion there, because I think, as far as I'm concerned, the diversity and inclusivity agenda has to come from top down. That's when you actually create cultural change in an organisation.
I agree. Tone from the top is super important. And what I say is that if you can create an inclusive culture, then the diversity will flow from that. If people feel they can bring their best selves to work, then the inclusion and they feel included and part of something, then the diversity will follow. What I would say, though, is as important as tone from the top is, I think it's always important, and I remind the team of this a lot, is that people's day-to-day lived experience is also heavily influenced by the people around them. So I can say all of these grand things about what we want to try and achieve and what our policies are, but actually people's lived experience, their data experience, they may not be interacting with me. They may be interacting with their principal or the senior associate or a partner in another department. Every single person in our organisation has a responsibility to live our values and to try and promote an inclusive culture. And that's something we're becoming increasingly focused on.
And
right?
One thing I feel, I can say as someone who is, a BAME female, is that I think there's, some of the onus has to fall on those individuals as well, and that, there's got to be sort of transparency and open dialogue, and, heightened self-awareness amongst those individuals who sometimes unwittingly sort of blame their gender or their race as the reason for being held back. And I think those individuals, personally from my perspective, need to take some ownership over, maybe I do need to sort of try a little bit harder because I'm not as good as drafting as I thought I was, etc. I know it sounds really controversial, but as far as I'm concerned, one of the game changer for me was actually knowing my own limits and taking responsibility for that, rather than blaming my ethnicity or my disability as a reason for being held back. And that sort of knowing where I had to focus my self-development was really helpful for me.
Yeah, look, I think that one of the reasons that we introduced the mentoring program for all of our young trainees was because actually I wanted everyone to have that, right? That inclusive philosophy. But at the same time, I know that some of our talent from sort of different minority strands will benefit disproportionately from that experience. The fact that they are able to build that senior network is going to disproportionately benefit them, and it will play a big part in leveling that playing field. I think that the diversity week and the trust and psychological safety, that is enabling people to have those honest conversations without fear of repercussion. Because one of the things is that, and what I say is, unless you know about a problem or challenge, it's difficult to address it. So we have a reverse mentoring program. So our different people can apply to be on the program, and senior leaders are mentored by other people within the firm, and it's still designed, as you know, to sort of get underrepresented voices into the room. And so I'm just doing my second program now, but my first reverse mentor was one of our young lawyers, a lovely lady who has a visual disability. And the second session we had with her was phenomenally powerful, because she said, well, actually, I'm not going to come meet you in your office today. I want you to meet me outside Silk Street, and we'll walk into Silk Street together, and I would like you to sort of try and experience the firm as I experienced the firm. And for me, that was an amazing experience, because I try and put myself in other people's shoes, but I can never really fully understand their experience. And so for me to do that with Claire, and to sort of experience the, Linklaters lobby, as you well know, it's all white, it's all marble. It probably aesthetically very pleasing, but not great if you have a visual disability, right? Because it's just a wall of white.
Yep.
We have lots of glass all over our building, which is brilliant. But if it's not clearly marked, that's a huge liability. So I had this experience, it was great. And it gave me a little bit of an insight into her day. And I said to her, look, as a senior person, is there something you think I could do? Just one thing that could improve your quality of working life. And she sort of reflected on the conversation. She said, actually, yes, there is. She said, one of my frustrations is the lifts at Linklaters, the buttons are braille, but the lift doesn't talk to you. So when I get in the lift in the morning, if someone else gets in after me and presses another button, I don't know whether I'm getting off on my floor or their floor, because I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So there are days where I step out of the lift on the wrong floor and then have to find out where I am and then get back in the lift, and I lose so much time. And so I said, okay. So I went to the ops team and said, just out of interest, can I do this? Can we do this? They went, yeah, that's easy. So we changed our lifts. And she was like, so the first time she experienced the new lift, she's like, wow, this is, for me, that little thing that I would never have thought of, that was a game. And if anyone listening to this has got lifts in their own building and they don't talk to you, see if you can change them, because for some people it could make a great difference. So it's those little things where people are honest and share those stories with you. She probably didn't want to, maybe not probably not the right example, but people don't want to be seen to be difficult or inconvenience. But actually, if we can create an environment where they're not, and they have those honest conversations, we can make really positive. And like for me, as little as that was, I was super proud of that. Disproportionately.
No, I agree with you. I think that we're going to run out of time in a bit, but one thing I just wanted to pick up on, just based on that story, is my own experiences, where there is that element of pride that a lot of people think, and I think this applies especially to people with disabilities, that asking for help is a sign of weakness, or flagging something as being a challenge is, again, a sign that you're weak and therefore not up to the sort of level that a firm in the city might expect you to be at, sort of thing. And it's having those open conversations. So, but look, that's a topic for another interview because we are running out of time. Was there, I guess it's been great sort of reminiscing with you about, life at Linklaters. Just to, another point on sort of reflecting, how do you think the city has changed over the past 20 odd years that we've been sort of, wandering around the square mile? And what do you think the future is going to look like? Shall I start when you think of an answer?
Yeah,
I mean, for me, it's about the technology. I remember my intake of trainees, because remember I started a couple of years before you, we were the first batch to have our own computers each. And I remember being given a Linklaters laptop, and because I was the special one, being the disabled trainee in the cohort, and taking that laptop home, and it taking, I think, 3 hours to synchronize with my desktop in terms of emails. So, I can see how in those days, working from home or working agilely was just not practical. Just wasn't. So for me, technology is really important. But then I also do wonder whether some trainees think that suddenly they need to be experts in coding, otherwise they won't flourish as a lawyer. I personally think no. I think ultimately it's about your technical development, understanding the law, but also knowing how to find the answers and where to find them, and that all important attention to detail.
Look, I absolutely agree with that, and I sort of what I sort of say to some of the juniors, and this was said to me, right, is that actually the difference between me and a junior is that I'm more comfortable dealing with things I've never seen before because I'm able to draw on all that experience. And actually, very often when you're talking to clients, it's fantastic if you've got the answer at your fingertips, but invariably the question will come in and you go, actually, I haven't got the answer at my fingertips, but all the client really wants to know is that you can get the answer to them quickly. So it's sort of having that confidence. I agree with you on the technical. I think as a junior lawyer, the technical skills are really important. And I think I would just encourage, as a young lawyer, as you're moving around the training, the seats, and you're progressing through your junior career, try and see as much as you can and as much different stuff as you can, because that gives you that broad experience and client base for later life. And actually, if you're very busy as a trainee in your seats and you've thrown yourself into it, not only will you give yourself a better chance to impress, but actually you can make a more informed decision about what your life choices are. But I agree with you, technology is a big change. I remember going to printers for one of our former partners and spending all Saturday there waiting for the document to come back. Nowadays, either you would get an email saying you can come and get it now, and I could pick that up remotely. Or even better, I can get it emailed to my home and I can look at it at home rather than having to the
precisely. Yeah.
So technology changed. I do think that the city is more diverse than it was. Definitely, I think there is.
I was just about to say that. That's certainly how I see it as well. Yeah.
And maybe not at the senior end, and that's partly because when you become a partner, you're invariably a partner for 1, 2, 3 decades plus. But at the junior end, if I look at my own statistics in terms of gender mix, minority ethnic talent we have at a trainee recruitment level, the pipeline coming through is much more diverse, which is brilliant, right? That is, it makes work much more interesting place to be. So there's much more diversity. And London has always been an international city. It's always attracted the best people from all over the world, but it still feels that is the case. And I think, I hope will that continue.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that I remember my trainee intake at Linklaters. I'm not going to go there because I don't want to embarrass you or your firm, but it wasn't great. So I think that certainly has changed. But I think we also need to acknowledge that the dial has to move forward in terms of, okay, we're getting this diverse group of individuals into the profession. How do we hold on to them? And that would be my sort of closing remark.
No, I agree with you. I think that is one of the big challenges for employers ever. I think is acknowledgement that we've got a talented recruitment team that is really tapping into the best talent from broad range of diversities, things like the virtual internships and contextual recruitment, which has been very important in the context of A-level discussions recently.
Yeah.
All of our outreach, our recruitment projects, the works we do with charities and the like. It's all good stuff. We get phenomenally diverse range of talent in the door. But actually, once they're in there, it's about what's their experience, which is why I think like the mentoring programs and development programs and removing unconscious bias and being objective, and all of those good things are important little building blocks. When you put them all together, mean that people feel included, and they will be happier, and they will progress. And it will take some time, because careers at law firms take a while, but I'm optimistic that people are moving in the right direction, and I know that we'll be held to account in years to come. So we have to continue to deliver on what we said we're going to do.
Brilliant. Well, look, we're out of time, I'm afraid, David. I could carry on talking to you for a lot longer.
I know.
Tons of content to go through, but it's been great reminiscing
Pleasure.
with you, and also hearing about sort of future plans for the firm, and also for the profession more broadly, and some brilliant advice there also for our listeners. So stay well, and thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.